Okay, Erev Tov, we are recording. Shalom, everyone. Just to go back and mention some things we discussed previously. We discussed that the love of Israel requires love of all people because the love of Israel is not for Israel themselves. Just to mention again, we are discussing the possible tension or clash between opposing racism and the idea of Israel being the chosen nation. Is it not racist? And we spoke about Am Yisrael's mission being universal. It is not something about ourselves, it's for the whole world. So as I said, we discussed that the love of Israel requires love of all people. Not only enables, but requires love of all people, because the reason for a special love of Israel is because of the blessing that Israel will bring to all of mankind. We also mentioned that even though there is a correlation between spirit and action, the spirit is broader than action, and the spirit of Am Yisrael is universal, even though the actions are national. The actions are to create a national religious framework of belief in Hashem and a covenant with Hashem, but the goal is universal. So the actions have a different, the balance between national and universal are different when you speak about action and when you speak about spirit. In action, the balance tilts, the balance is turned heavier towards the national side, but the end goal of all of this is international, is universal. And so in that sense, sometimes people are mistaken or are misled by the fact that the actions of Torah, of Yahadut, are focused very nationally, to think that it's about national things and against something or indifferent to things that are universal, but it's not that, but that's not true, or at least that's an option that we don't want to choose. We want to choose the option that Rav Kook is offering us, that the actions are national, but the spirit is international. One of the things that a few people raised in our previous meetings, a few of the things people raised were, I'd like to mention something. One of them is the difference between a chosen people and a people of value, and the difference between privilege and responsibility. Certainly, Judaism is not a privilege, but a responsibility. Maybe it also offers privileges, maybe it also offers opportunities, but it's basically the main issue. The importance of it is a responsibility, an international, universal, humanitarian responsibility. And mostly it's a responsibility and certainly not just a privilege. That is not necessarily the same as saying that it's not a chosen people, but a people of value. We did mention in one of our sessions in the past that that there's value to being chosen and put in the situation of having the responsibility, rather than being given the choice, the free choice, whether or not you want to be Jewish, being an elite unit like in the army that is a unit of only volunteers. As someone who is born Jewish, you of course have free will whether or not you want to exercise that Judaism, whether you want to carry it out and take responsibility for it. But you are Jewish, you are part of the group that was given the mission and given the responsibility, and hopefully you live up to it. And that, in that sense, I said it's important for me to pass this on to students, to children, to my children, and so on. So I would identify with the idea of responsibility, but I would not detract from the idea of a chosen people in the sense of it's not up to individuals volunteering. It was given to the nation to take the responsibility and designated that we must take this responsibility upon ourselves. Another issue that was raised by people in previous sessions is, does the idea of being a chosen people, isn't it understandable that that will then cause anti-Semitism, that will cause antagonism towards the Jewish people? And I'd like to address that today. And to add to that, the question, and I'll start off with this and then move on to other things, the question of the halacha of not saving a non-Jew on Shabbat if it violates the laws of Shabbat. The basic law, the basic halacha of Shabbat is that you violate the laws of Shabbat for pikuach nefesh, to save a life. But if it's a life of a non-Jew, you're not supposed to violate the laws of Shabbat as a Jew to save a non-Jew. And this sounds very harsh and very difficult and unacceptable. Before I relate to that, I'd like to say once again about other halachot that create a barrier or distancing between Jews and non-Jews, that they are up to us how, I've said this in the past, it's up to us how we want to take these halachot. For instance, not eating things that were cooked or baked by non-Jews, certain restrictions about what Jews and non-Jews can do or eat or drink together. Most of those laws can be overcome very simply by participating in the cooking, by turning on the flame of the oven, turning on the oven, and all kinds of things like that. And I believe that shows us that these laws are to give the Jews a reminder, be aware of your Judaism, never become unaware, never become indifferent to your Judaism. That is your responsibility to keep that up. Not saying don't have relationships with non-Jews, not saying never go out with non-Jewish people, never meet with them, never enjoy with them, but always have a reminder of your Jewish identity so you don't lose sight of that at any point. And given the balance that we mentioned before about keeping a national framework within a universal goal, a universal spirit, I think you can understand that balance and that putting together of these two sides, it goes very well with that idea, going back to the idea of a heart. Am Yisrael as a heart within the body, the organism of the nations, meaning the heart has to give something to everyone, but it has to remain a separate organ within the general organism. It has to remain a separate heart in order to be able to give life, to give good things, to bring blessings to the world. So those two go together. But the halacha of not saving a non-Jew, not violating the laws of Shabbat to save a non-Jew, that does not sound good. So I'd like to say the following. First of all, in today's halacha, that halacha is taken differently. Why? Meaning halacha lema'aseh, practically. If you are in this situation of violating or not violating the laws of Shabbat to save a non-Jew, yes, violate the laws of Shabbat and save the non-Jew. Why do the rabbis today say this? So there is a formal reason, and I would like to claim that there's a deeper spiritual reason underneath the formal reason. The formal reason is because if you don't save the non-Jew, it's going to put Jews around the world in danger. When there was an argument in Israel about selling or not selling houses to non-Jews somewhere in Israel, where there was a struggle between Jews and non-Jews over land, over who's going to be stronger in a certain city. And there were rabbis in Israel who put out a psak, a halachic decision not to sell houses to non-Jews. Rabbis outside of Israel reported that it created anti-Semitism and put the Jews in other countries in danger. Think of a doctor, a Jewish nurse in a hospital in Israel, not violating the laws of Shabbat to treat a non-Jew in the hospital in Israel, and then a Jew coming to a hospital in a different country and not being treated by the non-Jewish medical staff over there. So clearly, it creates a danger for Jews in other places. And therefore, because of this, this is the formal reason why halacha lema'aseh, practically, whether you're a doctor or a nurse or medical staff, or just you're walking in the street on Shabbat and there's an accident and someone collapses, and you can call an ambulance on Shabbat. This person is not Jewish, so that the ambulance will come, or you're an ambulance driver and you're going to drive on Shabbat to get this person and bring him or her to get medical treatment. Yes, violate the laws of Shabbat to save this non-Jewish person formally. Why? Because, think of the news on Sunday around the world. in Ra'ananas, a Jew did not violate the laws of Shabbat to save a non-Jew, oy vey, that's going to put a lot of Jews in the world in danger. So this is the formal reasoning. I would like to claim that there's a deeper spiritual energy flowing underneath this formal reason, and it goes like this. In the past, people lived very, very separately. You lived on one continent, people in other continents didn't even know that you existed. They didn't know that your continent existed. Everybody lived very private, small lives that were the range of what people were aware of was very small. So if you lived in a Jewish community, you were a Jew living in a Jewish community, you were a non-Jew living in a non-Jewish community in a different religion, everybody kept to their religion, and it was understandable that one person did not violate his religion in order to save someone from a different religion. If they weren't at war with one another, okay, that was already more positive than being at war with one another all the time. So the halacha was a kind of thing that was acceptable in the world, that one person does not violate his religion in order to save someone from a different religion. How different is the world today? In the past, if a Jew in Eretz Israel did not violate the laws of Shabbat to save a non-Jew, so nobody heard about it. Today, in the global world, with all the media, the international universal media, you do that in Ra'anana one Shabbat, it's on the news all over the world, and it creates anti-Semitism. But that's not just the reason. That's an expression of what has happened in the world. The world used to be very broken up into tiny little particles, and everyone living their own private lives. And today the world is a global village. Everyone is living inside everyone else's kishkes, because we all know what's going on with everyone else. Something happens in one corner of the world, 2 minutes later, it's on the news all over this planet. So it's not just a technical fact that is going to endanger Jews elsewhere. It's a spiritual, energetic fact. It's a different energy in the world. The energies of the world now connect all people to one another, and therefore spiritually, Judaism and halakha has to deal with this. And I would say even morally, in the past, it was morally acceptable. You lived your private life. Someone else's religion, someone else's life was not part of my life. I lived my religion separately. In the world today, the world is in a different place. We can live different religions. We look for ways to keep up our separate religions while respecting one another. When you have all kinds of religions meeting with one another, and I also participate in 2 such meetings that meet, whether it's once a month or whatever, with Muslim sheikhs or with an international interfaith group that studies together Christians and Muslims and Jews. And we try to keep up our beliefs and at the same time show respect and be respectful towards people and clergy of other religions. And that shows you that the world today is different. So the halakha found the formal way to reach the halachic decision that today we will violate the laws of Shabbat to save the life of a non-Jew, but the reasons for it, I believe, are the change in the reality in which we live, a more universal global perspective of our lives, and the halakha found its formal ways to connect to that energy, to that reality in the world today. So I think that's important to mention when we discuss possible differences between the relationships between Jews and non-Jews in the past and how halakha treated it, and relationships between Jews and non-Jews and how halakha should treat that today. I will stop here for a moment if anyone wants to comment about these things that I mentioned, and then I'll continue afterwards. Just please, if you want to speak, open your mute and go ahead.
Yeah, but there's something that still very much basically bothers me, that the need to find a formalist justification. I mean, why can't one just be honest enough to say that in this world, you don't let non-Jews die? I mean, because it's philosophically a big difference.
But you can't ignore the history of humanity and the history of Torah. And
Right.
also we live in a certain moment, and I don't know what's going to come along 100 or 300 or 500 years from now, and halakha has to work within its frameworks. So
Yes.
for me, it's totally acceptable that halakha found its formal channels to accept and to deal and to make a decision, a new decision about the reality of the world today. And at the same time, I would not only present that formality. In other words, in other circles, in other rabbinic circles or circles of hashkafa that maybe look at things differently than I do, they will only mention this kind of formal decision, and they will accept it as the whole picture. It's kind of something that we are pushed and shoved and forced, almost coerced to accept that we will violate the laws of Shabbat to save a non-Jew. They do accept it, but they kind of, we're pushed into the corner, and we have to accept this. But they're not discussing that question that you're raising, Eliezer. And I want to mention both. I don't want to overlook either one. I don't want to overlook what are the halachic tools and formal tools by which we make halachic decisions. But at the same time, I don't want to overlook, and I do want to recognize that the reason we are accepting this new halachic decision is not only because of formal halachic issues, but also because we really do see the world and the relationships between ourselves and people of other religions and other people in the world. We do see it differently than it was seen in the past. And I want to put both things on the table and give space to discuss and think about the relationship between those two aspects. Which I totally disagree with you. It says I'm putting.
Excuse me, I
rethink it.
Hello?
I really support sort of what I think Eliezer is saying, in that, at least my version of it is, I'd like to think that we have a fundamental moral responsibility, which somehow is deeper than some codification that was developed over the centuries. It offends me as a moral human, I think I'm a moral human being, that we would have to look for a codification variant that supports what to me is just the most obvious moral position in this example that we're using.
Thank you both, Eliezer and Don, for your positions, for what you said. I'm being challenged. That's great. I would like to say that it's even, to be totally honest, perfectly honest, I think it's very nice. I think it's beautiful. I think it's uplifting that you come to this realization, this moral realization. I don't think of it critically. I don't think of it as criticizing previous generations for not seeing it, because I think it's not right for us, and I think we don't have we can't put ourselves in our time into someone else's a different period in history and criticize them. And I think it's a nice thing, a positive thing that we've grown. I do believe that it is growth, that it is positive growth and development in this sense. And I do understand at the same time that halakha has to, it's not realistic to expect halakha to be ahead of where the world is morally. I do believe this is a positive moral development, and halakha then has to deal with it. It can't happen the other way around, because halakha does not demand things that we're not morally, we haven't, that challenge hasn't reached yet, hasn't come about yet. So halakha has to come after the moral development and deal with it. But it's important for me to say what I said before, that it's not only a formality, that I believe it is also a spiritual decision, and not just to say, oh, well, what can you do? This is the formal way we do it. And at the same time, I will also say, we don't know, just like they did not foresee a few hundred years ago where we will be today on this issue. I don't think we can foresee where they will be, the other they, the future they will be a few hundred years from now. And therefore, I do think we have to keep within the formalities of halakha. But I identify with what you're saying, Don, and therefore I don't only present it as a formality. It is also a spiritual and moral decision.
Rabbi, I'm not challenging that. I think, you have a wonderful point of view on this. But let me ask you, in a specific situation, I'm not talking about criticizing the previous generations. I understand how important it is to have continuity that way. But suppose you're in the ocean or something like that, and you see a cruise ship from Japan or from Korea sinking. Well, you wouldn't be in the ocean on Shabbat. So, okay.
You could but including Shabbat, it's okay.
But let's say, I don't know, you're in a situation that you see something and nobody else is there. And nobody knows you're there.
I am going to save him, Eliezer.
Yeah?
Yes, because I believe that is the right connection, the right putting together of the formality and the spiritual and moral side of it. When I violate Shabbat to save a non-Jewish person, I am not doing it with a stomachache about doing this only so that other Jews in the world won't be put in danger. I am doing it because he is a human being, and I believe it is morally the right thing to do. At the same time, I am aware of the way the halakha formally reached that decision.
Can I ask, at the risk of interrupting, Eliezer, perhaps along the lines of what you're saying, supposing you take this scheme, this picture that you've painted, Rabbi, that we're walking along the street and somebody who's walking on the opposite side of the sidewalk suddenly collapses, and now you have a moral conundrum. Do you go over to this person and ask, your first question will be, are you Jewish? And if the answer is no, you just walk away. If the answer is yes, let me help you. It reminds me, actually, of a true story, of my grandfather when he lived in California, when he lived in Los Angeles. He was, he had a problem, a medical problem, a heart attack kind of medical problem. And the first thing the ambulance driver did when they drove up was, show me your insurance. Well, it so happened that I was there, and I, being a polite Canadian, was not very polite. And he got taken to the hospital. Anyway, so, you don't ask somebody, are you Jewish? And then you decide to help or not help. I mean, from a practical perspective.
I absolutely agree. But again, that's us today speaking. And I'm not sure that a few hundred years ago, that's the way they felt. And I can understand why.
I want to say something. I mean, I learned this this topic in Hilchot Shabbat more in depth, but it's interesting that Kiddush Hashem and Chilul Hashem doesn't really enter into it. It's a question of whether what's good for the Jews, but not necessarily a higher level of Kiddush Hashem and Chilul Hashem versus,
Well, I would claim that it is part of it.
Okay, but it's not the traditional reason offering. It's not,
I'm aware of that, yes.
Rabbi, maybe it'd be helpful for me if you could explain briefly, where do we derive this halakha? Because you keep referring back to several hundred years ago. Was this not a halakha before that? I mean, where do we derive this?
Before, I don't know to say historically exactly where the change or the chidush, the new psak halacha, when it occurred, but I said a few hundred years to be safe. It may be 150 or 200, and maybe less than that, but certainly I'll give you a different example. This goes back about 200 years, more or less. The question of what's the word? operating, it's not an operation, it's kind of a pathologist, looking into a person died of a certain disease.
Autopsy. An autopsy?
Thank you. Do you perform an autopsy to understand what he died from, things like this? In halakha, in the past, this was considered, you don't violate, you're not supposed to perform an autopsy on dead bodies. A dead body is supposed to be honored and respected and buried, and not cut open and things like that. But if it's for pikuach nefesh, which is again the same issue, if it's to save someone's life, then you can. So the halakha in pikuach nefesh is you have to have, it's called something that is in front of you, meaning there is another person in the same place with the same disease, and maybe if I perform an autopsy on the body and I can understand the disease better and how to treat it, then I will be able to save the next guy's life. Just to study medicine or science, that's not a good enough reason to perform an autopsy. So in the halakha, I'm saying, I think I have to look up exactly, more or less 200 years ago, it was discussed and considered. There's an argument about it because you're in one place and no one there has the same disease, and there's no reason to perform an autopsy. Certainly today, it doesn't matter where you are on this planet, there is someone else somewhere else on this planet with the same disease, and performing an autopsy and understanding how to heal this disease is immediately relevant to someone else on the globe, and science and medicine share this kind of information globally exactly for that purpose, that we learn from one another. You perform this experiment on vaccinations in Israel, and the whole world is following to hear how it's going clearly, and so on. So it's the same kind of change. It's more or less the same time of change. Until not that long ago, certainly in the 19th, certainly the 18th century, people didn't know what was going on in one place and then another place, and people didn't know so much about one another, although it's a process. It didn't happen in one day. So I can't say exactly when. I would have to do some more research to tell you exactly when that changed. But what happened in my studying was exactly what people here are describing. It bothered me. It bothered me not only in the sense of what are my neighbors going to say, my non-religious neighbors, my non-Jewish acquaintances, these people that I meet with once a month and have a joint learning session, these Christians and Muslims, what are they going to say if they find out? What am I going to answer to them if they find out about this halakha? That's not the only thing that bothered me. It bothered me. It really bothered me. And when I looked into it and I saw this formal reason, so I understood, okay, this is the formal reason, but I continued thinking about it because of what people here are saying, because just being a formality wasn't enough for me either. And so I continued thinking about it, and this is what I formulated. And I'm sure that there are many other, not everyone obviously agrees, but there are other Torah scholars today, men and women, who would think along the same lines. Okay, thank you. I'd like to move on to the question of, see, that's one extreme example, but I think even just mentioning the idea of being the chosen nation can raise antagonism and create anti-Semitism. And I'd like to quote a few quotes from Rav Kook relating to these questions. And I think it very much has to do with how we understand and act on being this idea of the chosen nation, what we do with it, how we relate to it, both spiritually and practically. And I'd like to start with spiritually and then move on to practically. What do I mean by spiritually? If being chosen creates haughtiness, if being chosen creates a feeling of I am better than thou, and so on, I think that we are not only misinterpreting, we are taking the mission of being a chosen people, we are taking it in an immoral way. And we have to take it with the right kind of balance, and it's not easy. You really have to work at this. I'll tell you a little story from today. Someone called me, a young lady that grew up in Ra'anana and was in our kehillah. She's no longer in the kehillah because she got married and they don't live in Ra'anana. How can a young couple afford to live in Ra'anana? So, but she's dealing with something in her work. She was the chairperson of a certain thing that she was working on, and there was a CEO, and she had to fire the CEO, and he, after half a year of fighting with him and unpleasantries and so on, and now he's shaming her, and she called me to ask me if she's allowed to answer back. There are halachot of lashon hara. You don't shame a person, but he's shaming her. He's giving her a bad name. Can she answer him? And I discussed this with her today. And one of the things I said to her was, don't be too modest about your own good name. In other words, you have to be worried about having a good name. You can't overlook and say, well, if I'm being shamed and people will think bad things about me, lo nora, I'm not going to shame this other person. No, you also don't be too modest about it, because if you have to take care of your good name. At the same time, don't overdo your argument with him and put him down and step all over him and ruin his life. You're allowed to answer him. You're allowed to argue with his claims and so on. Don't give in and don't give up on your good name, but at the same time, don't overdo it with him. It's a fine balance to find. This is what I discussed with her. This was just this afternoon today. And I'm telling you this story because it reminds me of what we're going to study from Rav Kook now, because I think we have to find, in being Jews who believe we have a mission to the world, a very fine balance. And I was very happy to find this in Rav Kook, and here it is in my own personal translation. Don sent me a picture of a book today that has translations of Rav Kook. I'm very eager to see them, but for now I'll have to go along with my Google Translate and my own changes. So Rav Kook says, I have to use the share screen now. 1 second, here we go. There we are, okay? Everybody sees it now. It says Kovetz Zayin Kuf Peivav, which means that these are 8 of Rav Kook's just spiritual notebooks, like a spiritual diary, and this is what he wrote in notebook 7, entry 186. I won't go on about my admiration of Rav Kook. And he says the following: the infinite advantage of the holiness of Israel above all the nations should be engraved in the depths of the heart and the purity of virtue and the perfect morality, without any slag of crude self-love. And for this, a person needs to dedicate his knowledge and the depths of the refinement of his feelings all his life, until he can boast of the holiness of Israel in the purity of heart, in truth and in righteousness. I'm going to stop here. Maybe we'll discuss the continuation of this paragraph, but I'm going to stop here for now and stress the 2 sides of these lines, of these 2 sentences. One of them is that Rav Kook sees clearly that Israel has an advantage of holiness. Israel has about it some kind of inherent holiness. By the way, it's a national thing, not an individual thing. You have to connect to the nation, but that's for a different time. But there is an innate strength, unique strength of holiness in the Jewish people. But, says Rav Kook, given this, you have to work on the purity and the virtue and the perfect morality of your personality without any slag of crude self-love. If it's with slag of crude self-love, then you're misusing it. You're putting it together in the wrong way. You're creating it, you're forming it in a way which is not pure. And you need to dedicate knowledge and depths of refinement in order to reach this proper balance. You really have to work at this. You need dedication, you need to study, you need knowledge, you need refinement, you need depth of refinement in order to take this idea properly. To say, I have been given a mission to do something good for the world. It is my responsibility to take it without crude self-love. It's not easy. I don't think it's easy. But I was happy to see that Rav Kook says this is an important goal, an important thing to work on. You need dedication, knowledge, refinement, depth of refinement, and so on. At the same time, he continues, and he says in the second half of the paragraph that the name of Israel is so sacred that it's positive even if you're not pure enough. But at the same time, you will see in Rav Kook a lot of times the word but. I always say, not seriously, that one day I'm going to write a doctorate about the word but, B-U-T, in Rav Kook's writings, because it's always side A, but side B, but side A, but side B. So you see it here. So after he says that, he says, but the spirituality, the holiness of Israel is very positive, but still, it's only really proper when you really shine it in all its splendor. So I think this is saying something about, if we just go around the world, even before I gloat in front of anyone else, even without saying anything to any non-Jew or Jew, just within my own personality, we all know that if you are, if you feel something inside, someone out there is going to feel it at some point. You can't just cover it up all the time. So if you really feel gloating, if you have this slag of crude self-love because I'm part of the chosen nation, and you take it in a haughty, crude self-love way, it's going to be expressed, and maybe it will result in some kind of anger or antagonism towards the Jewish people. So yes, I do believe that it is our responsibility to dedicate knowledge and depths of refinement so that we take it and take it within our own personalities properly, even before we speak about how we behave and what our actions will be. So that's one thing I'd like to say. Before I share something else, again, I'm opening to people commenting, reacting, and so on.
There's a very simple word for this to summarize. It's the word humility. It's a beautiful expression of humility.
But I'd like to say, as I said before about this young lady that I spoke with earlier today, that that you have to make sure, there's also a danger of over-energizing humility and making, not only about Judaism, the Jewish people, the chosen people. If Mark Keel didn't believe he could be a good physicist, we would have lost good physicists to the world. And everyone chose something that they do in life and they're good at. And if they didn't believe they're good at it, that wouldn't be good. And so the world will lose if the Jews totally give up on their understanding and their belief that they have something to give to the world. So humility, yes, but don't put yourself down to the point, or don't put Am Yisrael down to the point where, we're just like everyone else, we have nothing to give to the world. Maybe other people also have what to give to the world, but don't say, I don't want to say I have something special about me, because that the world is not going to gain by that, it's going to lose from that. Okay. Another aspect, I believe, is in our actions. How do we act with non-Jews? Do we focus our energies of doing good, of doing chesed, only on Jews or also for non-Jews? Take the state of Israel. The state of Israel is amazing in that sense, both in technological abilities that are then passed out to, given to the world, spread in the world. Whether it's with units, in Tsar that know how to deal with earthquakes, with other tragedies, and within a day there's an Israeli airplane with a field hospital set up somewhere within 2 days, and they start treating people. And Michael, if you mentioned before Chilul Hashem and Kiddush Hashem, that's a tremendous Kiddush Hashem. And it's also showing that it's not just that we're saying we're chosen, everybody stay away from us. We're saying we have certain abilities, we're giving them to the world. It's important to do that, to show that. I believe it's important to show respect to other people, and not only to not disrespect, to be, as I said before, about all the halachot that create a certain barrier between Jews and non-Jews, and how much can we eat together and drink together, and so on. At the same time, I believe it's not only permissible to be in a relationship with a non-Jew and go out with them and spend time with them. It's actually important. It's actually valuable because it's important to give out the message that we are here to connect with the world within barriers to conserve our Judaism. That's our responsibility. But another part of our responsibility is to create relationships with the world. As Jews in Galut, it was so much more difficult because, first of all, we were the small minority in non-Jewish surroundings. It was much more of a threat to be in relationships with non-Jews. It was very, very frightening and threatening. As a Jewish state, we're much stronger and we're much more able to maintain such relationships and so on, both as individuals and as a state, as a country. At the same time, it goes back to something we've mentioned in the past, which is it's dafka the Jews, those who have a strong Jewish backbone, a strong Jewish identity, who are not so interested in being in relationships with non-Jews, and those who don't care about their Jewish identity, who are in stronger relationships with non-Jews. And I would like to see Jews with strong Jewish identity creating strong ties and relationships with non-Jews, because I believe that brings out a good energy that is good for us and good for the world. And it's important to do that, to give the right balanced message and not just go around the world saying we're a chosen people we keep to ourselves.
Well, one of the things outside of Israel, when you're like in Texas, you have a lot of, I mean, not just Texas, you have a lot of Jews that are not religious anyway. And you kind of have that they sometimes feel if you're religious, you're not approachable. So one of the things here is you have to be approachable to them as well as the non-Jews here. And what's interesting is sometimes like they'll say, oh, why can't you come eat with us and everything? I won't tell if you eat the non-kosher food and I won't. It doesn't work that way. So it's a whole other ballgame with that too. You have to be a model or something to everybody, not just to the non-Jews. Yeah,
of course. And as much as I speak about this, and this is the topic that we're discussing, Tachlis, my energies are spent within Am Yisrael. And I do participate right now in two groups. Well, as I mentioned before, one of them is with some Muslim sheikhs, and we discussed different kinds of things. And we just had a meeting last night. Maybe the next one is in a month. And a different group that meets and studies together, more kind of mostly clergy, Jewish, Christian, Muslim. I give these issues about 3 hours a month, okay? I'm not saying it's not important. It's important enough for me to do that. When I turned to rabbis a few years ago and created one of these groups, since then the group has changed, but whatever, when I first did this a few years ago, one of the rabbis I approached said, no, I'm not interested. I'm busy, I'm gonna work on my connections with our own people. I didn't argue with him. And how many hours, what's the mathematical number? What percentage of my time is, 24 hours a day, let's say 30 days in a month, 3 hours a month I spend on my relationships with non-Jews. Okay, so it's not like it's on the top of my list, but at the same time, I don't want to say it's non-existent. I think it's unimportant. And so that also says something, maybe about me personally, maybe about how I think of the issue, but I do think it does have importance and we shouldn't ignore it.
I think it's much more difficult here to have a relationship with non-Jewish people. Today I was speaking to an Israeli friend of mine who's very, very secular, who knows absolutely nothing about Christianity, didn't even know it was Easter, because because it's not the Christian festivals are just not discussed here unless you happen to live in the Galilee. Whereas in England we have something like the Council of Christians and Jews, and now and Muslims, where there are meetings, because these people, we live next door to them. Unless you happen to live in a shtetl in Stamford Hill, they're your neighbours. They're the people that you work with. They're the people that you go to school with.
It's strange in a way in Israel, because on the one hand, as neighbors, they're usually not our neighbors. On the other hand, as a country, whoa, we have to work on. It's not easy to work out our relationships with the Arabs in Israel, Christians, Muslims, and so on. It is something we have to address and not just overlook and not just say, oh, we don't care. They're goyim anyhow, ignore them. You know, they're not only democratically, they're 10, 20% of the country, but also it's an issue that we should not, that it's very detrimental to us if we overlook it. So on the one hand, they're not my neighbors and I don't meet them daily. On the other hand, you know, I don't want my only relationship with them to be when I'm a soldier and stopping them at some kind of barrier and so on. I want to have a more significant relationship with them, which is one of the reasons why I was involved in creating this group of rabbis and sheikhs that meet and discuss things.
So, Rabbi, there's no question that it's easier to be antagonistic to a group that you have dehumanized. I mean, that's what happened to us throughout history and many other peoples around the world today. So for us to interact in a normal human way with other people so that they can see, they can humanize us, it's going to improve relations with most people. I'm not going to say everybody because that's simply not true. Something that you said earlier struck me as an interesting nuance, and I just wanted to see what you think. Yes, we need to do good deeds, but do we need to do them because it will impress others or because it's just the right thing to do? And they will get the message from seeing what we do, such as sending our people to disasters and that sort of thing, whether it's that, whether it's resuscitating the non-Jew that fell in front of you on the sidewalk. It's just the right thing to do. And I think if we as a people have that reputation among the non-Jews that we do the right thing, that can't help but be beneficial.
I understand where your question is coming from. I think that what I meant was both, meaning it's a value in and of itself. At the same time, it's a value that's important to bring out to the world so that that energy is out there having its influence. Like you said, you're not going to get everyone to recognize it or accept it or change their attitudes that they've had before they looked into the facts. But it also has an importance of a message, of an international message, but as a value. I'm not. If you another thing that connects, and we mentioned spirit and action. If you act in a way that's not authentic, and just to make an impression, I believe the world feels that. You know, not everyone, but some people feel that, and they get the message that you're being nice just to look nice, and not because you're really being nice. So. It also has to be authentic. You have to really appreciate it so that it comes out in the right way.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
So in Chutz La'aretz, you have a lot more opportunities for working with the non-Jewish community. There are so many interfaith events, even in the U.S. All kinds of holidays, Martin Luther King Day, Thanksgiving Day, where Christians and Jews will certainly have services together, and they won't mention Christ, but would plan to use texts from the Psalms, Tehillim, and from other places. But there's a lot of interaction that goes on that way. I had one experience I'll share just for the humor of it. In in Salem, Mass, and has a long history. There was an interfaith clergy council, and if the Wiccans came, the Catholics would not sit at the same table. But apart from that, there was a lot of cooperation and planning together. Major events when 9/11 occurred.
Mhm.
I was in Salem at the time, and there was a major public event held in a big park where the Jewish community read texts and the Christian community read texts, and there was a sharing, and I think that was really, really important for the average person.
Mm-hmm. And I think that exists much less in Israel, but it does exist a little bit, and it should be encouraged and try to have it give it more weight and publicity and numbers. It could grow in numbers. Yes. Okay. I'd like to share another way. Let me just take a quick look at something Michael has sent us. It's a little.
Yeah, I dug it up. I dug out from my smicha class about it from the Sector of Zara and the Achronim and stuff with different commentaries. But
yeah, but what do you bring from the latest poskim? Because did you bring here from the latest poskim?
I think it mentioned the Igrot Moshe. That's pretty recent.
Okay, can you tell us, just because I don't want to take up the time now, can you just give us an overview of what he says?
I'm just trying to remember it. All right. Tom Sofer, I think, is in Eretz Israel. It's talking about the context of treating of a Jewish midwife treating Gentiles who have to give birth, which is considered a pikuach nefesh situation. Whether she's allowed to do it, whether she will be allowed to do it for for pay or even not for pay, if enmity, that is, if hatred results from this.
Yeah, but you mentioned about Feinstein.
I'm sorry?
Can you say something about what Moshe Feinstein says?
Yeah, the Igrot Moshe. Okay. He's basically reacting to the Mishnah Berurah's.
Mishnah Berurah is the beginning of the 20th century, and Rav Moshe was the middle and second half of the 20th century until 1982.
So it says basically, the Igrot Moshe says if somebody would not treat Gentiles, he would be killed for letting Gentiles die. His murder would go unpunished by the authorities. Therefore, since there's an issue of pikuach nefesh, is permitted to treat them on Shabbat. That's what the bottom line is.
That's the formal reasoning and justification that I mentioned before.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to share one more. I prepared about 5, but I have time for one more source. This is This is another one. And look at this. This is interesting. Says Rav Kook, Abraham's grace. We have two figures who are known to be people of chesed, that their trait, their quality is chesed. One of them is Abraham, and the other one is Aharon HaKohen, who is the figure of Hevei mitalmidav shel Aharon, ohev et habriot umekarvan laTorah, a person who shows love of other people. And he says, Rav Kook, Abraham's grace, Abraham's chesed, includes all the people in the world, and Aharon's grace is concentrated in Israel. And whoever clings to the true measure of grace in the light of Torah clings in the spiritual sense, that he really is connected to this value and to this action, should connect these two clouds of glory of Abraham and Aaron together, and the two lights will shine upon him. The clouds of glory in the sense of the clouds that accompanied Bnei Israel in the desert. So like each one of them, Avraham Avinu and Aaron HaKohen representing a kind of cloud of glory, a kind of presence of Shekhinah that's expressed in his trait and in his actions. So these are two different acts of chesed, two different circles of chesed. Abraham's chesed is universal, and Aharon's chesed is concentrated in Am Yisrael. And a person who clings to the true measure of chesed in the light of the Torah should connect these two clouds, should not choose either the glory, the cloud of the glory of Avraham, the trait of Avraham, or the trait of Aaron, but should connect them. What is the value of connecting them? Then he will say, beloved is a man in that he was created in the image of God, and beloved are Israel in that they were given tools of, let me see how I pronounce this word, covetousness. Did I get that right? That's the Mishnah in Masechet Avot saying that, every person, Chaviv Adam shenivra b'tzelem, beloved is every man in that he was created in the image of God, shenivra b'tzelem Elohim, and a special love for Israel, Chavivin Israel, shenitan lehem kli chemda, that they were given the special tools of the Torah. Chemda is something that what's the verb? To covet? How do you pronounce that? In any case, the Torah is a special tool that was given to Israel. And again, so Rav Kook is saying the Mishnah in Masechet Avot also mentions both circles, and you have to be connected. You should be connected to both circles, both to the circle of Israel and Torah, and to the circle of every man being created in the image of God. And by the quality, and look at the words now, by the quality of Aharon's grace, the quantity of Abraham's grace will rise, and it will also shine in the light of quality. Then the world will build a complete building, a binyan shalem, in awe and peace together, and they will call Jerusalem the throne of Hashem. Abraham's grace is broader. It's a broader circle. It includes all of humanity. Aharon's grace is stronger. It's a special quality. And if you put the two together, you're bringing the quality of Aharon's chesed to the quantity of Abraham's chesed and bringing a blessing to the world. This is a binyan shalem, a complete building. And you are making Jerusalem the throne of Hashem in the sense that Hashem's light will shine from Jerusalem to the whole kingdom of Hashem, which is the whole world. You're creating the same idea of being a chosen people in the sense of bringing a light to the world, but having a special light. If we do not have a special light, then there won't be a special light for the world. So let me just run down and continue, not in reading all these passages that I've prepared, but just to run through it and say the following. This one says the following. The breadth of the heart, when your heart wants to be broad, which sometimes wants to bring in the whole world, all of humanity, within the special affection that is revealed to Israel, needs to be examined. You want your heart to encompass all human beings, everyone in the world. Says Rav Kook, good or bad, neither good nor bad, needs to be examined. Why does it need to be examined? Because he says if it means, we're just like everybody else, we're overlooking the special quality of Israel, then it's not good. It's going to lose the quality that we can bring to the world. When it recognizes the special spiritual quality of Israel and wants that to spread to the whole world, then it is positive. So this is saying the same kind of ideas. I'm not going to dwell on this one. Another one is this one that says that Israel's desire is to do good to the whole world, both in quantity and in quality. And in the second sentence, in the third line here, he says this good feeling, according to its size, scope, and depth, must also be adorned with great wisdom and great heroism in order to know, or I would say strength, in order to know how to bring it to fruition in all its shades. Meaning that the desire to do good in the world, it's not good enough, just like as an individual. Just doing chesed to everybody without asking any questions is not going to make the world the best place it could be, because you're going to be giving tzedakah to someone who is a drug addict, and he's going to use your money to buy drugs. So it's not good enough just to be good of heart. You also have to have a head. You also have to give out chesed in the world in a way which has wisdom, in a way that has boundaries, just like as parents. You don't just give out chesed to your children boundless, even though your love is boundless. Boundless love doesn't mean just give it out without any limits, because that just creates spoiled people, spoiled children. So too, Am Yisrael giving out chesed to the world is a great desire, but it has to be done with sechel, with wisdom, and that is what the Torah is guiding us to do. So I think Rav Kook, in all these passages, I think I'm succeeding in giving the main message that he's saying again and again. And now he says this, it's a fundamental mistake to turn back from the idea of being a chosen people, because if we forget our greatness, we forget ourselves, and then there's something which we cannot give, we're supposed to give to the world, and we won't give it. So don't forget, don't turn back from the idea of a chosen people, but take it and bring it out to the world in a proper way. And if you will allow me to bring one more paragraph, because I don't want to dwell on this issue again in 2 weeks, I want to move on to something else, then let's end with this. Says Rav Kook the following: until the era of the future redemption, we have influenced the world only the values of duties, morals, and justice that come from knowing the true God. And duties the world does not desire to accept. And if it accepts, there remains in the heart resentment towards the main source that awakened this knowledge of duty, which does not allow the barbaric soul to spread as it desires. Meaning, if we have brought to the world, we have limited barbarism, we have limited slavery, we have taught the world restrictions and not just to go around being violent and controlling others and so on, then the world has accepted it, but there's a certain sediment, there's a kind of resentment that remains in the heart, because you Jews, you have limited my desire to spread as I want, without any limitations. The strongest anti-Semitism expressed in this way is if you study what Nazism was about. The Jews brought the morality to the world, and they don't allow the how do you say, the Aryan race to the evolution does not allow the social evolution of the Aryan race to win over all these lesser races. Come along the Jews, which are a lesser race, and they invent this horrible thing called morality, and it ruins evolution. So that's kind of giving expression to this idea. But, says Rav Kook, here's another paragraph from my doctorate. But when the era of the revelation of the light of the world comes, it will become known to the world that the ways of life of true pleasure we bring to the world, the happiness of life that gives it its value, without which it is deprived of all value. And pleasure and happiness is something that is equal for all, at least to desire it. And the source that brings happiness and pleasure is respected and liked. And therefore, says the prophet Zechariah, 10 people from all tongues of the Gentiles will hold the garment of a Jewish man, saying, let us go with you, for we have heard that God is with you. So Rav Kook is saying, at the end of days, the idea is that Israel will bring to the world the notion, the understanding, that living a life of values that includes restrictions. You don't do whatever your heart desires, but that is happiness. Life of value within restrictions is pleasure, is happiness. And when we will be able to understand that idea within ourselves and to bring it to the world, then a lot of the resentment towards Am Yisrael, because we've brought these restriction of morals and values to the world, will dissipate, and people will be grateful for the blessing that we will bring to the world. So I'm just throwing this out shortly and after the last minutes of this session, just as a thought for the future, what the world can reach, has potential to reach, if we do it, if we get it right. And I will end here.
I remember, Rabbi, you said something about several weeks ago about the higher level of Gula, also quoting Rav Kook. That this seems to be the corollary or something, how to sort of implement that maybe.
I'm not sure what you're relating to.
There was when we first started about the different levels of redemption or introduction of monotheism, I think.
If God miraculously redeems us, or we have the ability with the gifts that God has given us to redeem ourselves, the second would be considered a higher level because we have learned to use our abilities. Again, it's looking at man with great respect. In other words, what's common to both is that man is not just a bundle of evil inclinations, even evil yetzarim that needs to be held back by a higher force, and therefore it's all about, not allowing us to live with all our strengths. It's rather, if Cook looks at it as enabling human beings to bring out their strengths, but in a balanced, positive way. And in that sense, it connects both the idea of how we will bring redemption with the blessings that Hashem has given us, and not by Hashem creating miracles, and also Israel bringing a blessing to the world, showing people that restrictions do not lessen us, but make us, accepting that we can't just do whatever our heart desires. Does not make us lesser people. It makes us greater people. If we connect to that in a really, honestly, genuinely, in a deep sense, connect with that, the world will be a much happier and greater place. And we can have an important and major share in bringing that to the world. And even if this is utopian, it's certainly utopian for tomorrow morning, but even if it's utopian for a long time yet, it's still a beautiful goal to strive for. I think in 2 weeks we'll choose a new topic. Even though we have not, you never complete a whole topic. There's always more to think about. But I think in 2 weeks we'll choose a new topic.
Okay, thank you very much.
Getting there is half the fun.
Thank
I'm
you.
going to stop the recording, but I don't have to leave if anyone wants to discuss something.
Thank you very much.